893%.
Right.
I want you to just, stop whatever you're doing and just sit with that number for a second. 893%. That is how much anti-Semitic incidents have skyrocketed in the United States in just the last 10 years.
It is a staggering figure. I mean, it's hard to even wrap your head around a jump that big.
Right.
And to give it even more gravity, we are looking at New York, supposedly one of the most diverse places on earth, leading the nation in these stats.
Exactly. And if you're listening to this, you're probably feeling that tension. Today is January 20th, 2026. We're a few weeks into the new year, and honestly, the headlines coming out of New York are, well, they're messy. They kind of feel contradictory.
On the surface, they absolutely do. It looks like the legal system is operating with two completely different rule books.
That's it, because just last week, we saw two massive news stories break that seem to point in completely opposite directions. On one side, you have New York Attorney General Letitia James slapping a settlement on a Jewish extremist group called Betar US, basically forcing them to shut down.
A very decisive, very aggressive legal move.
Right. But then, practically at the same time, just days apart, you have video surfacing of a protest outside a synagogue in Queens.
Yeah.
And people are openly chanting, "We support Hamas here." And as far as we know, no arrests, no shutdowns, just police standing by.
And that right there, that is the friction point we are deep diving into today, that feeling of a double standard.
So here's the mission. We're going to try to answer one question.
Yeah.
Where's the line? We've got a massive stack of sources today, the latest 2024 audit from the ADL, enforcement records in the Attorney General's office, and some surprisingly dense legal statutes about wearing masks in public.
We're going to navigate that messy, often confusing legal boundary between hateful speech, which is often protected, and hateful conduct, which is a crime.
And more importantly, we need to figure out why New York seems to be struggling so hard to find that line right now. Yeah. So let's unpack this, because I think to understand the anger people are feeling, that sense of why isn't the government doing more, we have to look at the sheer scale of the problem. You mentioned the data earlier.
Right. If you look at the ADL's audit of anti-Semitic incidents for 2024, this was published back in April 2025, but it really sets the baseline for the reality we're in today.
Okay.
In 2024 alone, there were 9,354 incidents.
And that's a record high.
It is the highest since the ADL started tracking this 46 years ago. But the number itself isn't even the most important part.
What is?
It's the nature of the incidents. For the first time, the majority, 58%, included explicit references to Israel or Zionism.
Okay, but pause there for a second, because this is something I hear people argue about all the time.
Yeah.
Is that a real distinction? Because if I'm a Jewish student walking to class at Columbia and someone is screaming in my face about Zionism, does that actually feel different than, traditional anti-Semitism? Or is it just a distinction without a difference?
That is the million-dollar question. Legally and politically, people try to separate them, anti-Zionism versus anti-Semitism. But the data suggests that on the ground, the lines are totally blurred.
Right.
When you look at the campus crisis, which saw an 84% increase in incidents. You see vandalism at UC Berkeley saying Zionism is Nazism. You see assaults at the University of Pittsburgh. To the victim, that geopolitical nuance doesn't matter much when they're being harassed.
And New York is right at the center of this storm.
The epicenter.
Yeah.
1,437 incidents in New York alone.
Okay, so the temperature is just boiling over. You have these numbers climbing every year. The public is scared. And people looking at the government saying, do something. So let's look at what they did do. Let's talk about Betar US.
Right. This is the big news from just last week, January 13th, 2026.
So who are these guys? Because Betar sounds, well, it's a historical name, isn't it?
It is. It has roots in a Zionist youth movement from the 1920s. But this specific group, Betar US, described themselves as an activist movement.
But that's not what the AG found.
No. The Attorney General's investigation found something very different. They weren't just activists with signs. They were engaged in a pattern of violence.
This is where the details get just wild. I was reading the press release from the AG's office and some of the tactics they used. It sounds like a spy movie gone wrong.
It was pure intimidation. The investigation found they were threatening to put Jewish activists, people they disagreed with politically, on lists to be shared with foreign authorities.
Basically trying to stop them from traveling.
Right.
But the one that really stuck out to me, and this is genuinely disturbing, was the beepers.
Yes. This is a very specific and a very menacing tactic.
For those who might have forgotten the news cycle from a while back, this is a reference to that operation overseas where pagers and beepers belonging to Hezbollah members exploded.
Correct. And Betar members were using this imagery to terrorize people in New York. The report details how they would approach people they perceived as Muslim or Arab or even Jewish academics they disagreed with and try to force these beepers into their pockets.
That is, I mean, that's not speech. That is a physical threat. That's telling someone, I want you to blow up.
Exactly. It is conduct. That's the key word we're going to keep coming back to. They also called for blood in Gaza. They urged members to bring weapons to protests, knives, pepper spray, even attack dogs.
Attack dogs? In Brooklyn?
According to the investigation, yes. And because they crossed that line from saying, we hate you, to actually shoving beepers in pockets and bringing weapons, the state stepped in.
So they got hammered, right. I mean, this sounds like a criminal enterprise.
Well, this is where the listener might feel a bit of that frustration you mentioned earlier. It wasn't a criminal trial. It wasn't jail time. It was a settlement.
A settlement? Like a business deal?
In a way, yeah. The organization, Betar US, agreed to permanently cease this conduct. They're winding down their operations in New York and dissolving their nonprofit status.
Wait, explain that strategy to me. Why a settlement? If they were threatening people with dogs and explosives, why aren't they in handcuffs?
It's kind of the Al Capone approach. You know how they got Capone on tax evasion because they couldn't stick the murder charges?
Okay, right.
The Attorney General has broad powers over nonprofits and charities. It's much faster and easier to shut down an organization for violating nonprofit laws than it is to build a criminal assault case against every single member. That takes years. This stops the bleeding today.
Okay, I get the speed argument, but what about the punishment?
There is a monetary penalty. $50,000.
Wait, pause. $50,000. That's shockingly low. I mean, if I threaten a neighbor with an attack dog, I'm going to jail. Why is a group doing this on an organized scale getting a fine that costs less than a car?
It's worse than that. It's a suspended penalty.
You're kidding me.
No, they only pay it if they violate the agreement again. If they stay quiet, dissolve the group, and stop the harassment, they don't pay the $50,000.
That's a pinky promise. Don't do it again or you'll owe us.
Effectively. And this really highlights the limitations of that civil regulatory power. The AG is regulating them as a rogue organization, not prosecuting them as individual criminals.
But you're right to point out the perception gap. To the average person, it feels like a slap on the wrist for terrorizing a community.
Especially when you contrast it with what happened in Queens.
The protests at the synagogue, right? So keep Betar in your mind dissolved, threatened with fines because of their conduct. Now let's pivot to January 10th, 2026. A few days before the Betar settlement, we're in Kew Gardens Hills, outside the Young Israel Synagogue.
There was an event happening inside, I think, about real estate in Jerusalem, and a group called the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation organized a protest outside.
And we have video, reported by CBS News, of protesters behind the barricades. And what are they chanting?
We support Hamas here.
Very clearly. Now, Hamas is a designated terrorist organization. They are sworn to the destruction of Israel. And here you have people on a New York City sidewalk outside a Jewish house of worship chanting their support for that group.
And the reaction was immediate. You had condemnation from everywhere. Mayor Zoran Mamdani called it wrong and said it has no place in our city.
Governor Hochul called it disgusting and dangerous. The ADL called it a horrific act.
Yeah.
But, and here's the big but, were they arrested? Did the Attorney General dissolve their organization?
No.
And this is where the listener, and frankly, I get stuck. Why? If Betar gets shut down for being extremists, why does a group chanting support for terrorists get a police escort?
It comes down to that line we talked about, speech versus conduct. Under the First Amendment, and specifically under the standards set by the Supreme Court case Brandenburg v. Ohio,
Okay.
speech is protected unless it is intended to, and likely to, incite imminent lawless action.
Imminent lawless action. That sounds like some serious legal jargon. Unpack that for us.
It means that you can stand on a corner and say hateful, vile things. You can express support for groups that the government considers enemies, but unless you were telling the crowd, go burn down that building right now, and the crowd looks like they're actually about to do it.
Protected speech.
It's protected speech.
That sounds broken. You're telling me I can stand there and cheer for a terrorist group, and as long as I don't hand out flyers with a date and time for an attack, the cops just have to watch.
It feels broken to a lot of people, but it's the price of the First Amendment. The court says that abstract advocacy of violence, like saying, I support Hamas, is political speech. It's different from a direct threat or a specific instruction to kill someone.
So the distinction is, Betar shoved a beeper in a pocket. That's action. While these guys just used words. Speech.
Precisely. The NYCLU, the New York Civil Liberties Union, is very clear on this. Police can restrict time, place, and manner, like keeping them behind barricades so they don't block traffic, but they cannot stop the chant itself based on the viewpoint, no matter how offensive it is.
It creates this painful gap where the community feels unsafe, but the authorities say our hands are tied. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, are their hands really tied? Because we found something in the research stack that suggests New York has some tools that isn't using. Or maybe it is. Let's talk about masks.
Yes. New York Penal Law, Section 240.354.
Masked loitering. I honestly didn't know this was a thing until we dug into this stack.
It's a fascinating and kind of archaic statute. It says that a person is guilty of loitering if they congregate in a public place with others while masked or disguised by unusual or unnatural attire.
And this isn't about COVID masks, right? This is older.
No, this goes back much further. Historically, these kinds of laws were often used to target groups like the Ku Klux Klan. If you couldn't get them on anything else, you could get them for standing around in hoods without a permit.
So play this out for me. I'm a prosecutor. I see a guy in a mask outside that synagogue in Queens chanting, "We support Hamas." How do I use this law?
It's incredibly difficult. First, you have to prove loitering. In New York law, loitering basically means standing around without a legitimate purpose.
Okay, but if they're holding a sign, don't they have a purpose?
Exactly. If they are holding a sign, they are protesting. That is a constitutionally protected activity. Boom, defense attorney wins. They aren't loitering. They are assembling.
Okay, so the protest sign protects the mask.
Usually. Then you have the unusual or unnatural attire clause. If it's January in New York, a scarf over your face is natural.
Right.
You'd have to prove they are wearing the mask specifically to conceal their identity for the purpose of a crime. It's a really high bar.
It sounds like a law written for guys in white hoods in 1920, not college kids in 2026.
Precisely. It's a rusty tool. But there is another layer here that makes it interesting. Loitering is just a violation, like a traffic ticket. But it's listed as a specified offense for hate crimes.
Wait, explain that. How could a traffic ticket become a hate crime?
Think of the hate crime statute like a turbocharger on a car engine. You can't have a turbocharger without an engine.
Right, the loitering or assault is the engine. The hate is the turbo that, doubles the horsepower of the sentencing. But you can't just prosecute the turbo.
So you need the underlying crime first.
Exactly. If you can prove they were loitering the engine and they selected their victims based on religion, the turbo, then that minor violation becomes a much more serious charge. But if you can't prove the loitering because they're protesting, the whole car just doesn't start.
That is just frustratingly technical.
It is, and that's why you see the police hesitating. If they arrest everyone in a mass, the ACLU sues them for unlawful arrest. If they don't, the community feels abandoned.
Right, so the streets are messy. The physical line is blurry. But surely in the digital world, where everything is recorded and tracked, the government has a tighter grip on hate speech, right?
You'd think so.
I mean, Attorney General James went after the Peck Giants, didn't she?
She tried.
Yeah.
And actually, AG James found out the hard way that the digital wall is even harder to climb than the physical one. This was the letter she sent to Google, Meta, TikTok, Rumble, basically demanding to know how they handle hateful content.
Which sounds reasonable on the surface. Hey, stop the terrorists from posting. But then a group called FIRE steps in.
The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression.
Right. They represented Rumble, the video platform, and they argued that the AG's letter was a veiled threat. They call it jawboning.
Jawboning.
When the government flexes its muscle to force a private company to censor speech that the government can't legally ban itself.
A threat to do what?
To force them to censor. They pointed to a federal judge who had already put an injunction on New York's online hate speech law.
An injunction, so the judge basically hit the pause button on the law.
Hit the pause button and said, this law is likely unconstitutional.
Yeah.
The judge ruled it was too vague. It required platforms to have a mechanism for complaints about hateful conduct. But the definition of that was so broad it could include almost anything.
It creates a chilling effect.
Exactly. If you're afraid the AG is going to sue you, you start deleting everything, even protected political speech, just to be safe. And that's what the First Amendment tries to prevent.
And what happened with the AG's letter to Rumble?
She rescinded the request. she backed down.
That tells you something right there.
It tells you that the legal ground for policing speech, even online, even hate speech, is very, very shaky. The AG knew she would likely lose that fight in court.
So let's pull all this together, because we've covered a lot of ground and the map looks pretty chaotic. We have a massive surge in anti-Semitism, nearly 900%.
Yeah.
We have a government that is willing to crack down hard on conduct, like the Betar US group with their beepers and threats.
Correct. When you touch someone, when you threaten immediate violence, the system works. It might result in a settlement rather than jail time, but the system engages.
But when it comes to the gray zone, the chanting in the street, the "we support Hamas," the law steps back. The politicians issue strong statements. They say it has no place here, but the police don't move in. And on the internet, the AG has to back down when she tries to push too hard.
And that leaves the citizen, in a very uncomfortable position. You're told the government is there to protect you, but the definition of protection seems to stop at physical safety, psychological safety, the feeling of being welcome in your own city. The First Amendment doesn't protect that. In fact, it often protects the thing that's destroying it.
It really makes you wonder if the tools we have are obsolete.
That is the core question I keep coming back to.
Which brings us to our final thought. We always like to leave you with something to chew on.
If we look at this contradiction, that we have a law on the books from the 19th or 20th century that criminalizes masked loitering to stop the KKK, but we have a 21st century reality where radicalized groups can openly chant support for foreign terrorist organizations under the banner of free speech.
It feels like a mismatch, like trying to fight a drone war with a musket.
Exactly. So the question is, are our 20th century civil liberty laws actually equipped to handle the 21st century reality of globalized, radicalized hate? Or are we fighting a modern war with obsolete weapons?
And if we update those weapons,
Yeah.
if we tighten the speech laws, do we risk destroying the very freedom we're trying to defend?
That's the tension. It's a conversation we are going to be having for a long, long time.
Absolutely. Look, this stuff is heavy, but understanding the machinery behind the headlines, why the AG acts here but not there, at least gives you a map of the territory.
Knowledge is really the only way to navigate it.
That's it for this deep dive. Check the show notes for the full stack of sources, including those laws we mentioned. Stay curious, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.